Welcome, YouTubers, to another episode in my Grammar Hero series. In today's video, we're going to be discussing percents, which is a topic that frequently appears on both the arithmetic reasoning as well as the mathematics knowledge subtest of the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, that is the ASVAB. In the first half of this video, we're going to take a look at our three objectives. That is, we're going to look at changing percents to decimals, decimals to percents, and percents to fractions. After that, we're going to spend the next half of the video looking at the three types of word problems involving percents. And then finally, we're going to work out about 10 different practice problems that should closely mirror what you'll see on the ASVAB. Again, on the ASVAB, you're not allowed to use a formula sheet or a calculator. So as you work through this video, make sure not to use any of those resources. In order to get the most out of today's video, I do strongly encourage you to make an effort to work out as many of the practice problems as you see on your own scratch paper. That is, after I read a question, you should pause the video, attempt to work it out on your own, and then resume playing the video to see if you and I came up with the same solution. And I say that's especially true once we get to number 5. In the description of this video, there's going to be timestamps that correspond to these objectives. So if for some reason you're only interested in working on practice problems, by all means go ahead and skip to that section of this video. So all those things finally being said, let's go ahead and get started with today's video. All right, so to start today's video, let's talk about percents in general. Percent means per 100, and writing a number as a percent is a way of comparing the number with 100. So for example, 42% is the same as 42 over 100. Again, percents are really just fractions with a denominator of 100. Any percent can be changed to an equivalent fraction by dropping the percentage symbol and writing the number over 100. So 25% is the same as 25 over 100. Of course, as I discussed in my video on fractions yesterday, we would go ahead and reduce this since it is a fraction. More specifically, we can divide the numerator and denominator by 25. 25 divided by 25 is 1. 100 divided by 25 is 4. So in other words, 25% is the same as 25 over 100, which can be reduced further to 1/4. Okay, so that's an overview of percents. Again, percents are just fractions over 100. Let's talk about how to change percents to decimals. It's a pretty straightforward process. To change a percent to a decimal, again, you drop the percent symbol, and then you just move the decimal 2 places to the left. So let's take a look at a few examples here. In this example, we have 25%. Again, technically the decimal's at the end of the number when you don't see it. And then we just move the decimal 2 places to the left, 1, 2. So in other words, 25% in decimal form is 0.25. In this example, we have 75%, so let's drop that percent symbol. Let's add our decimal at the end of the number, and let's shift it 2 places to the left, 1, 2. So as we can see, 75% is the same as 0.75. 6.8%, again, we're going to drop that percentage symbol, and we're going to shift the decimal 2 places to the left, 1, 2. Then we're going to fill in a 0 as needed. So 6.8% is the same as 0.068. And then 0.63%, which is a very small number. Again, we're just going to write down that number, drop the decimal or the percentage sign, and then move the decimal 2 places to the left, 1, 2, fill in our zeros. So we can see that in decimal form, 0.63% is 0.0063. So that's all there is to changing percents to decimals. All right, now let's talk about doing the opposite. Let's change decimals back to percents. And as we can see, to change a decimal to a percent, you just move the decimal place 2 places to the right and add the percent symbol. It's basically the opposite of what we were doing. And let me grab my pen again. I seem to have lost it. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, we have 0.27 now, and we want to convert this to percent. And take its decimal, shift it 2 places to the right, 1, 2, add our percentage symbol. So we can see that 0.27 is the same as 27%. 4.89. Again, take our decimal, shift it 2 places to the right, 1, 2, add our percentage symbol. So we can see that 4.89 in terms of a percent is 489%. Now we have 0.2, and we want to convert this to a percent. Again, take its decimal, shift it 1, 2 times to the right, add a 0 as needed, and throw on the percent symbol. So this is 20%. And now we have 25. Again, in case it's not obvious, when you can't see the decimal, it's always at the end of the number. Shift the decimal place 2 places to the right, 1, 2, add our 2 zeros, throw up the percent symbol. So we can see 25 as a percent is 2,500%. Pretty big number. Okay, so again, that's all there is to changing decimals to percents. Let's take a look at how to change percents to fractions. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned how to do that. Again, to change a percent to a fraction, of course, you drop the percent symbol, and then you write the original number over 100, and then you simplify the fraction to its lowest terms. So we're going to drop the percent symbol in 10%. We're going to write it over 100, and then we're going to simplify if possible. In this case, we can see that 10 and 100 are both divisible by a common factor of 10. So let's go ahead and reduce this. 10 divided by 10 is 1. 100 divided by 10 is 10. So 10% is the same as 1 over 10. Let's do the same thing with 25%. Again, write that number down and drop the percent symbol. Place it over 100 and reduce if possible. In this case, we should see that 25 and 100 have a common factor of 25. So we can divide both of those by 25. In other words, 25 divided by 25 is 1. 100 divided by 25 is 4. So we can see that 25% is the same as 1 over 4. Now we have 75%. So again, write down 75, and we're going to drop that percent symbol, place it over 100, and reduce if possible. In this case, we should see that 25 and 100 are both divisible. Our 75 and 100 are both divisible by 25. So we'll reduce this by a factor of 25. 75 divided by 25 is 3. 100 divided by 25 is 4. So as a decimal, as a fraction, 75% is 3/4. And then finally, we have 1%. So that's going to be 1 over 100. And of course, we can't reduce that. So this is the same as 1 over 100. All right, so that's the first half of this video. Again, we looked at how to change percents to decimals, decimals to percents, and then percents to fractions. Pretty straightforward and simple process. All right, now that we've discussed those three things, let's spend the rest of our time tackling some word problems that are going to mirror what you'll see on the ASVAB. Before we get to those, though, let's start with some simple examples to get practice translating word problems into equations that we can then solve. In general, you're going to encounter three types of problems on the ASVAB. One type of problem is going to ask you what number is 15% of 63, for example. Another type of problem may ask you what percent of 42 is 21. And a final example might say 25 is 40% of what number. As long as you can recognize these three different types of problems involving percents, convert them into equations, and then solve, percent should be very, very easy. That said, it does take some practice taking these word problems and translating them into equations. So let's go ahead and review some of the rules as to how we do that. Again, for our purposes, we need to know that is always means equal in mathematics. Of is always going to be multiply, and a number, what percent, and what number is always going to refer to n. As long as we can apply these things to these word problems, we'll be in good shape. So let's go ahead and get some practice doing that. Again, this is that first example I mentioned. What number, as we just saw, what number we can represent as n is equal 15% of 63. Again, we're going to represent this 15% as decimal, so that's 0.15. Of is multiply, as we just saw, times 63. So to solve this one, we do n equals 0.15 times 63. And just like that, we took this word problem and translated it into an equation that we can then solve. As you can see, to figure out what n is, all we do is have to multiply 0.15 by 63. That is, we have to multiply a decimal by a whole number. That looks like this, 63 times 0.15. The rule to multiplying decimals and whole numbers is to make the decimal a whole number by shifting its decimal place. In this case, we have 63 times 0.15, so we're going to shift its decimal place 2 times to make 0.15 15. Again, so in reality, we're doing this, 63 times 15. And since we shifted the decimal place 2 times over here to the right, we're going to shift it 2 times to the left over here. Once we're done doing this arithmetic, 3 times 5 is 15, carrier 1. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 1 is 31. Bring a 0 placeholder in before we start multiplication with this 1. 1 times 3 is 3, and 1 times 6 is 6. Let's add. 5 plus 0 is 5. 3 plus 1 is 4. 3 plus 6 is 9. Bring our 2 decimals back in. 1, 2. So we can see that n in this case equals 9.45. All right, so let's look at that second example. What percent of 42 is 21? Again, what percent, as we saw, we can represent as n of x. Of is multiply, so that's x. We just write 42 as is. Is equal sign, and then we just write 21. So to figure out this one, what percent of 42 is 21? We do n times 42 equals 21. And you could write this as this, 42 n equals 21. And as you can see, in order to solve for n now, all we do is divide both sides by 42. This crosses out, leaving us with this fraction that is 21 over 42. And 21 divided by 42 is actually 1/2. So n can be 1/2, which we know is 0.5 or 50%. Okay, so that's all there is to that one. Again, we just translated this small word problem into a mathematical equation that we can then use to solve for n. All right, so let's take a look at this third example. Again, we have 25 is 40% of what number? Again, we're just going to write 25 as is. Is always corresponds to equal. 40% we're going to express as a decimal. Of is multiplication. And then what number is n? So to solve this one, we're going to write this equation. 25 equals, and 0.4 times n is just 0.4 n. Okay, so by solving for n, we'll figure out what the answer to this one is. Again, we're going to divide both sides by 0.4 to get n by itself. This is going to cross out, leaving us with just n over here. And now we can see n equals 25 divided by 0.4. So let's work that off to the side. We have 25 divided by 0.4 here. The rule to doing division involving decimal and a whole number is that you cannot have a decimal outside this division bracket, in which case you're going to have to take this decimal in 0.4 and shift it one time to the right to make 0.44. And you're going to have to do the same thing to 25, a corresponding number of times, and add a 0. So in reality, we're working out this problem, 250 divided by 4. All right, now the question is, how many times does 4 go into 2? It doesn't. How many times does 4 go into 25? It's going to be 6 times, given that 6 times 4 is 24. 25 minus 24 is 1. Drop down this 0. 4 goes into 10 2 times without going over. 4 times 2 is 8. 10 minus 8 is 2. 4 doesn't go into 2, so we have to add a 0. When we add that 0, we're going to bring up a decimal. 4 goes into 20. What's that? 5 times without going over. Given that 4 times 5 is 20. So we can see there's no remainder. In other words, this is 62.5. So n in this case is 62.5. Again, pretty straightforward process. All right, so as you can imagine, the word problems that you're going to see on the ASVAB are going to be more challenging than the previous examples we worked on. That said, we're going to use the same techniques to solve the more challenging word problems. That is, we're going to come up with a phrase that lets us translate the word problem into an equation very easily. So let's look at a few examples of those, and then after that, we'll just do word problems that will mirror what you'll see on the ASVAB. So in example 1, it says on a 120 question test, a student got 96 correct answers. What percent of the problems did the student work correctly? So let's try to write this as a phrase. Again, we're going to use the words is, of, and what percent. So let's think about how we're going to do that. In this case, it's pretty straightforward. We can write 96 is what percent of 120. Okay, and again, we have our is, which is equal. We have our what percent, which is our n. We have of, which is multiplication. So let's go ahead and write an equation to express this. 96 equals n times 120. And let's write this as we would in mathematics. N times 120 can be expressed as 120n. Again, we're trying to solve for n, so we're going to divide both sides by 120. This is going to cross out, leaving us with just n over here. As we can see, n equals 96 divided by 120, so let's work that off to the side. This is 96 divided by 120. Now we're asking ourselves, how many times does 120 go into 96? It doesn't, so I have to add a decimal there. And when I have to add a 0 there, and when I add that 0, I have to bring up a decimal right there. Now the question is, how many times does 120 go into 960? I'm going to say it's going to be about 8 times. So let's see if that will get us there. 120 times 8. 0 times 8 is 0. 2 times 8 is 16, carrier 1. 1 times 8 is 8 plus 1 is 9. So we can see that 120 times 8 is in fact 960 with no remainder. So n in this case equals 0.8. In math, it's customary to write the variable for which you solved on the left. So this is going to be n equals 0.8. And again, we want to know what percent. This is given in decimal form. So to convert this to a percent, we shift its decimal 2 times to the right, 1, 2, add a 0 and a percent sign, so we can see n equals 80% for this one. Okay, these admittedly do take a lot of practice to get pretty good at. Again, you have to go from this word problem to a nice simple statement that lets you translate that simple statement into a equation that you can then solve. So there's going to be plenty of practice problems in this video. For example 2, it says how much HCl, which is hydrochloric acid, is in a 60 milliliter bottle that is marked 80% HCl. So in this case, we want to figure out what is 80% of 60. That's going to be our simple phrase. And again, what is, if you recall, we represent as n. Is always equal. We're going to write 0.8 here. Of is multiply, and then 60. So this one translates into n equals 0.8 times 60. And this one's pretty easy to figure out. Again, we got 60 times 0.8. That is, we're multiplying a whole number and a decimal. In order to do this, we have to shift this decimal one time to the right to make 0.88. So we're going to, in reality, we're working out 60 times 8, albeit with one decimal to shift back into the left at the end. 0 times 8 is 0. 8 times 6 is 48. Shift your one decimal back in. So we can see that n in this case is 48. So to answer this question, what is 80% of 60? That's going to be 48. And of course, that's milliliters. All right, let's work on another example. It says if 40%, or it says if 48% of the students in a certain college are female and there are 2,400 female students, what is the total number of students in the college? So in this case, we can express this using this. 2,400 is 48% of what number? And again, we have our is, which is equal. We have what number, which is n, and we have of, which is multiply. So let's write our equation. 2,400 is equal 48%, again, as a decimal, 0.48, of multiply what number? N. Okay, so let's clean up this a little bit. This is 2,400 equals 0.48 n. As we can see, in order to solve for n, we're going to divide both sides by 0.48 to get n by itself. This is going to cross out, leaving you with just n over here. And as we can see, n equals 2,400 divided by 0.48, which looks like this. 2,400 divided by 0.48. Again, in order to do long division with decimals, we have to make sure there's no decimal outside the division bracket. In this case, there is. So we're going to have to shift this decimal 2 times in 0.48 to make it 48. We're going to have to do that a corresponding number of times in 2,400. So 1, 2, and fill in zeros. So in reality, we're doing this problem. That is going to be what? 2,400,000 divided by 48. Okay, so now we're asking ourselves, how many times does 48 go into 2? It doesn't. How many times does 48 go into 24? It doesn't. How many times does 48 go into 240? That's going to be, I'm going to say 5 times. So let's confirm that. 48 times 5. 8 times 5 is 40. Drop down your 0, carry your 4. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 4 is 24. So 48 goes into 240 5 times. Therefore, it goes into 240,000. You bring up these zeros 5,000 times. So 5,000 times 48 is in fact 240,000. As we can see, n in this case is 5,000. In math, it's customary to write the variable for which you solved on the left. So this is n equals 5,000, which means that if there are 2,400 female students, there are 5,000 students in total. All right, so let's look at example 4. It says if 25% of the students in elementary algebra courses receive a grade of A, and there are 300 students enrolled in elementary algebra this year, how many students will receive an A? So let's rephrase this word problem, and we can rephrase it like this. What number is 25% of 300? And look what we have. What number? N is equal 25% stays the same, and of multiply. So this is n equals 0.25 times 300. And now we can just solve this one by doing this multiplication here. Again, we're doing multiplication with a decimal and a whole number, so let's write this off to the side. 300 times 0.25. Again, we want to shift this decimal in 0.25 such that it becomes a whole number as well. We're going to shift it 2 times to the right. So this becomes 300 times 25, albeit with 2 decimals to shift back into the left at the end when we're done. So let's work this out. 0 times 5 is 0. 0 times 5 is 0. 3 times 5 is 15. Before we start multiplication with this 2, add in a 0 placeholder. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 3 is 6. Let's add 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 is 0. 5 plus 0 is 5. 1 plus 6 is 7. Bring our 2 decimals back in. 1, 2. So we can see n is 75. So that's going to mean 75 students will get an A in elementary algebra. Okay? All right, so now let's take a look at some word problems that are going to closely mirror what you'll see on the ASVAB. And in order to solve these problems, we're going to have to use all the techniques that we've seen in the video so far. So all that said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so for question 1, you can see it says on a 120 question test, a student got 84 correct answers. What percent of the problems did the student work correctly? So let's rephrase this to make it a little bit easier to work on. I'm going to rephrase this as 84 is what percent of 120? Okay, at some point, I'm going to stop writing this out and just set up the problems. But for now, let's use this method. Again, 84 is equal what percent? N of multiply, and just 120 is 120. So this becomes 84 equals N times 120. Again, let's clean this up a little bit. This is 84 equals 120 N. So as you can see, we're solving for n now. So let's divide both sides by 120 to get n by itself. This crosses out, leaving me with just n over here. As we can see, n is 84 divided by 120. So we can regard that as long division. 84 divided by 120. Let's go ahead and do this long division. Now we're asking ourselves, how many times does 120 go into 84? Doesn't. We have to add a 0 there. We add that 0, we have to bring up a decimal there. I'm going to say 120 goes into 840 7 times, but let's confirm that. 7 times 0 is 0. 7 times 2 is 14, carry your 1. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. So this is 7 times 120 is exactly 840. So we can see there's no remainder. N equals 0.7 in this case. In math, it's customary to write the variable for which you solved on the left. So this is N equals 0.7. As a percent, that's N equals 70%. In other words, 84 over 120 is 70%. All right, and let me erase that to get it out of our way for this next problem. All right, number 2 says an engineering student answered 81 questions correctly on a 90 question test. What percent of the questions did she answer correctly? So in other words, we want to know what is 81 is what percent of 90. Again, we have our is equal what percent and of multiply. So let's write this out. 81 equals n times 90. All right, let's clean this up a little bit. 81 equals 90n. Let's divide both sides by 90 to get n by itself. This leaves you with n over here. And as we can see, this is 81 divided by 90. Let's go ahead and reduce this fraction to make the math a little bit easier. I know both 81 and 90 are divisible by 9. 81 divided by 9 is 9. 90 divided by 9 is 10. And more often than not, most people can convert this to a percent pretty easy. Again, 9 divided by 10 is 0.9, and we should know that 0.9 is 90%. In math, it's customary to write the variable for which you solved on the left, so this is n equals 90%. So to answer this question, the student got a 90% or answered 90% of the questions correctly. All right, as we can see, number 3 says a family spends $450 every month on food. If the family's income is $1,800 each month, what percent of the income is spent on food? So in other words, we want to know 450 is what percent of 1,800? Again, we have all those elements. We need to write this as an equation. Is equal sign what percent and of multiplication. So let's go ahead and write this equation. 450 is equal what percent and of multiply 1,800. Again, let's clean this up a little bit. 450 equals 1,800 times n, or 1,800n. Again, we're solving for n, so we're going to divide both sides by 1,800. This is going to cross out, leaving you with just n on this side. And as we can see, n equals 450 divided by 1,800. To make this a little bit easier, we can cross out these corresponding zeros there. So this becomes 45 over 180. We should see that both 45 and 180 are divisible by 9. So to make this math a little bit simpler, let's divide 45 and 180 both by 9. 45 divided by 9 is 5, and 180 divided by 9 is 20. And we can actually reduce 5 over 20 a little bit further if we wanted to by dividing 5 and 20 by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 20 divided by 5 is 4. So as we can see, n equals 1/4. And again, we should know that 1/4 is equivalent to 0.25, so n equals 0.25. And we should also know that 0.25 is the same as 25%. So as we can see, the family spends 25% of their monthly income on food. And again, in math, it's customary to write the variable for which you solved on the left. Okay, so again, we didn't have to do any long division. We simply simplified the fractions that we got, and then we should realize that 1/4 is the same as 25%. So in many cases, you're not going to have to do that long division. All right, let's look at number 4 now. It says how much HCl, hydrochloric acid, is in a 60 milliliter bottle that is marked 75% HCl. All right, so for this one, we're going to rephrase it like this. What number is 75% of 60? Again, what number? N is equal, and then of multiplication. So let's write our equation. N equals 0.75 times 60. And by working this out, we'll figure out what that number is. So this is N equals, as you can see, we have multiplication involving a decimal and a whole number. So let's work this off to the side. And this is 0.75 times 60. And in order to do this multiplication involving this decimal and whole number, we're going to have to shift this decimal 2 times to the right to make 0.75 75. So in reality, we're working out this problem. 75 times 60, albeit with 2 decimals to shift back into the left at the end. So let's work this out. 5 times 0 is 0. 7 times 0 is 0. Add a 0 placeholder before we begin. So we're going to start multiplication with the 6 now. 6 times 5 is 30. Carry your 3. 7 times 6 is 42. 43, 44, 45. Let's add. Again, this is 0 plus 4,500, so it's not too hard to work that out. Bring in our 2 decimals, 1, 2. So we can see that N is 45 in this case. In other words, 75% of 60 milliliters is 45 milliliters. All right, number 5 says a farmer owns 28 acres of land. Of the 28 acres, only 65 can be farmed. How many acres are available for farming? So in this case, we want to figure this out. What number is 65% of 28? Again, we have all the elements to easily translate this into an equation. N is what number, is equal, of is multiply. So let's do this. N equals 0.65 times 28. And by working this out, we'll know exactly how many of those acres are available for farming. Again, we have multiplication involving a decimal and a whole number. That is, we have 0.65 times 28. In order to do this, we're going to have to shift this decimal 2 times to the right to make 0.65 65. And then at the end, we're going to shift those decimals back in. So we have 65 times 28, albeit with 2 decimals to shift back in at the end. So 5 times 8 is 40, carry your 4. 6 times 8 is 48, 49, 50, 51, 52. Add a 0 before we start multiplication with that number. 5 times 2 is 10. Carry your 1. 6 times 2 is 12. Plus 1 is 13. Let's add. 0 plus 0 is 0. 2 plus 0 is 2. 5 plus 3 is 8. And 1 plus nothing is 1. Bring our 2 decimal places back in. So we can see that N in this case is 18.2. In other words, 18.2 acres of the 28 acres are available for farming. All right, so number 6 says, of the 420 students enrolled in basic math, only 30% are first-year students. How many are first-year students? Okay, so in this case, we want to rephrase this as this. What number is 30% of 420? And again, what number? N is equal of multiply. So let's go ahead and write our equation. What number? N. 30% is 0.3 in terms of a decimal. Multiply and 420. So in this case, all we do is have to figure out what 0.3 times 420 is. That said, we're doing multiplication with a whole number, 420, times a decimal, notably 0.3. In order to proceed, we're going to have to shift this decimal one time to the right to make 0.33. And once we're done doing this arithmetic, we'll shift that decimal back into the left. So this is 0 times 3, which is 0, 2 times 3, which is 6, 4 times 3, which is 12. Bring our one decimal place back in so we can see n in this case is 126. So of the 420 students, 126 students are in fact first-year students. All right, so number 7 says if 48% of the students in a certain college are female and there are 1,440 female students, what is the total number of students in the college? So let's write our little phrase that will help us translate this into an equation. And I'm going to write it like this. 1,440 is 48% of what? And I can't spell today. What number? Okay, we have is equal of multiplication, what number? N. So let's write this out. This is 1440 equals 0.48 times n. Okay, let's clean this up a little bit. 1440 equals 0.48 n. So as you can see, we're solving for n at this point, so let's divide both sides by 0.48. This is going to cross out, leaving us with just n over here. And as you can see, n is 1440 divided by 0.48. Let's try to simplify this fraction and make the math a little bit easier. And this is 1440 divided by 0.48. We should recognize that 1440 and 48 are divisible by 12. 12 goes into 144 12 times, therefore it goes into 1440 120 times. You just tack on that extra 0. 48 divided by 12 is 4, therefore 0.48 divided by 12 is 0.04. And we can actually reduce this even more. Again, I know 12 and 4 have a common factor of 4, so let's divide both of these by 4. 120 divided by 4, well, 12 divided by 4 is 3. Just tack on that 0. So 120 divided by 4 is 30. And then 0.04 divided by 4 is just 0.01. So this becomes 30 divided by 0.01. And this, it turns out, is pretty easy to do. So let's do that off to the side. Again, this can be regarded as long division. That is, we can do 30 divided by 0.01. And in order to do this long division, we have to shift this decimal because we can't have a decimal outside this division bracket. So we're going to shift it 2 times to make 0.01 just 1. And we're going to shift this decimal in 30 a corresponding number of times. So 1, 2 times. So in reality, this is 3,000 divided by 1. Anything divided by 1 is itself. So 3,000 divided by 1 is 3,000. Given that 1 times 3,000 is 3,000 with no remainder. And as we can see, n equals 3,000. It's customary to write the variable for which you solved on the left in math. And this n refers to the fact that there are 3,000 students in total if 48% of them are female. Okay. Number 8 says, suppose 60% of the graduating class in a certain high school goes to college. If 240 students from this graduating class are going to college, how many students are in the class? So let's write our phrase. 240 is 60% of what number? Again, we have is equal of multiplication what number n. So let's work this out. Again, this is 240 equals 0.6. That's the same as 60% times n. Again, let's clean this up a little bit. This is 240 equals 0.6 n. We're solving for n, so let's divide both sides by 0.6. This is going to cross out, leaving us with just n over here. And as you can see, we have 240 divided by 0.6, so let's work that out. This is 240 divided by 0.6. Again, as far as doing long division goes, you cannot do it with a decimal if that decimal's outside this division bracket, so we're going to have to shift this decimal one time to make 0.6 just 6. We're going to shift this decimal in 240 a corresponding number of times. That is one time. So in reality, this is 2,400 divided by 6, which is much easier to work out. 6 goes into 24 4 times. Bring up those two zeros. So we know 6 times 400 is 2,400 with no remainder. So in this case, n is 400. Again, it's customary in math to write the variable for which you solved on the left, so n equals 400. This n refers to how many total students there are in the class, so there are 400 total students. Number 9 says, in a shipment of airplane parts, 3% are known to be defective. If 15 parts are found to be defective, how many parts are in the shipment? So let's come up with our little phrase. Again, that's going to be 15 is 3% of what number? And I can't spell n today, our number today. All right, so we have all the elements. We need to write this as an equation. Is equal of multiplication and what number? N. So this is 15 equals 3% in decimal form is 0.03 times n. Let's clean this up a little bit. 15 equals 0.03 n. All right, let's solve for n now by dividing both sides by 0.03. This is going to cross out over here, leaving you with just n. And as we can see, n is 15 divided by 0.03. In order to do this, we have to shift this decimal, which is outside the division bracket, so that it's a whole number. So it's going to be 1 2 times to make 0.03 just 3. And we're going to shift this decimal inside the division bracket a corresponding number of times, 1 2. So this, in other words, is the same as 1,500 divided by 3. 3 goes into 15 5 times, and just bring up these two zeros. So 3 times 500 will be 1,500 with no remainder. In other words, and again in math it's customary to write the variable for which you solved on the left. So in other words, there are 500 parts in the shipment. If 3% were defective, and that 3% corresponds to 15 parts. All right, the final question in this video says there are 3,200 students at our school. If 52% of them are men, how many men are enrolled at our school? So we want to know what number is 52% of 3,200. And my pen's starting to act up as soon as I get to the end of the video. We have all the elements we need to translate this into an equation. What number? N is equal of multiplication. So this is N equals 0.52 times 3,200. And as you can see, in order to find N, we're just going to take 3,200 and multiply it by 0.52. That said, we're doing multiplication, albeit with a whole number and a decimal. In order to proceed, I'm going to have to move this decimal in 0.52 2 times to the right to make 0.5252. And once I'm done doing this arithmetic, I can work this out and shift that those decimal places back in. So that's going to be 3,200 times 52 with 2 decimals to shift back into the left. 0 times 2 is 0, 0 times 2 is 0, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6. Add a 0 before we start multiplication with this 5. 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 2 is 10, carry your 1. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16. Let's add this up. 0 plus 0 is 0, 0 plus 0 is 0. 4 plus 0 is 4, 6 plus 0 is 6, nothing plus 6 is 6, and nothing plus 1 is 1. Bring our 2 decimals back in, 1, 2. So as we can see, N in this case is 1,664, which means that if 52% of the 3,200 students are men, that means 1,664 students are, in fact, men. Okay, so that was that one, and that is it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. As always, you're more than welcome to leave some feedback in the comment section below. I'm almost done covering all the topics on the arithmetic, reasoning, as well as the mathematics knowledge subtest of the ASVAB. But if you like the content I'm creating, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and cut you loose. Konnichiwa.